Hello everybody, my name is Brady and I'm a 19th century American historian and we are back with another React video, and today we're going to be finishing OverSimplified's videos on World War II, which should be a lot of fun. But before we get started, I just want to shout out the newest channel members. Thank you to Rebecca Jackson and Eduardo Monforte. Thank you for becoming channel members. And if any of you want to become a channel member, there is a link in the description box below to do so. Now, let's get into the video. So as I said, we are going to be finishing OverSimplified's videos on World War II. It's another one of those part two-ers. When his videos are split into part one and part two, the first one has a lot of foundation building. And that's always been something that's really appealed to me, like building the foundation of a story, cause rather than effect, but you can't really have cause without effect. So this is the natural progression of things. So like, even though I tend to prefer that other stuff, I understand why I have to know about it all. Either way, having one thing without the other is kind of pointless in the grand scheme of things. So I get it. But I love those part ones. All right, so let's get this started and let's see if I know anything about this. We're going to start getting into the U.S. involvement, so maybe this will be easier for me.
This video was made possible by Skillshare, an online learning community. Stick around until the end of the video to learn how you can get an exclusive deal just for Oversimplified viewers. So what else is happening? Well, when I said Britain was all alone, that wasn't entirely true. Many Commonwealth nations and other allied colonies had joined the war in Britain's support. They would play a key role throughout the war, particularly in the African and Italian campaigns.
The African campaigns, I'm going to be very interested in that. I love how... Hold on. Let me just go back. I love how it says they're alone, and then it's like, actually, they're not alone, and it lights up like half of the world here. I know that's an exaggeration here, but that's a lot of blue there. I know we don't have like the same level of firepower of a superpower, but that is not insignificant there. We have the U.S., I believe at this point, they're probably providing weapons and stuff. Like they're doing that thing like, hey, we're neutral, but take these guns, probably? Or does that come a little bit later?
Support. They would play a key role throughout the war, particularly in the African and Italian campaigns. On the Axis side, Germany, Italy, and Japan signed the Defensive Tripartite Pact, bringing their military alliance even closer together.
Aww.
The Soviet Union's war against Finland should have been an easy victory, but it became a humiliating struggle, and their military ineptitude was put on full display. In the end, they did force the Finns to sue for peace. Then, they continued their honor...
I just noticed that the hammer and sickle is the,
full display. In the end...
Hold on. It's the hammer and pickle thing. I've seen that he has a t-shirt for that, and I kind of wanted it. That's kind of funny, though. With Finland, they're not necessarily, or I don't know them as any sort of a military power. I imagine Russia thought they were going to come in and steamroll them there. So this is probably a huge blow to their ego at this point, which is never good for morale. Good on the finish, though. Good on Finland right there. That's actually really impressive there, given the mass of Russia. But they're also not the best organized, right? Wait, this is Stalin's Russia, so I'm not sure. This is definitely different from World War I Russia, but it's still kind of slow to organize.
They did force the Finns to sue for peace. Then, they continued their honorable campaign of pushing around much smaller countries by annexing the Baltic states and part of northern Romania. France's colonies in equatorial Africa were like, heck no, we aren't going to join the Germans, and they all pledged their allegiance to free France, except for Gabon, which had to be taken by military force. The Allies also tried to capture the strategic port of Dakar, but that ended in failure. Mussolini had seen Hitler's successes, and he thought now it was Italy's time to shine, so he tried to take British Somaliland, and that went pretty well. Then he tried to take Egypt, and that went less well. Then he tried to take Greece, and that went really badly. Churchill began referring to Italy as Europe's soft underbelly.
Ooh, Churchill could talk some smack, it seems. I didn't know much about the African campaigns. That's something that I was never taught much about in, I guess, public school. And when it comes to learning about Africa in general, I didn't learn nearly as much as I would have liked to until I got to college. I took a class on African colonialism, which I thought was a really cool class, but it didn't really go into military history nearly as much. So this is still kind of weird for me. But I would really love to learn a little bit more about that. I always found colonialism very intriguing.
He began favoring a military campaign from the south and
Get him,
started sending
Churchill.
British troops to Greece. All of this had Hitler pretty concerned, and he moved to protect his southern flank. He had been getting friendly with Hungary and twisted their arm into signing the Tripartite Pact and joining the Axis powers. Romania was also eager to join for protection against the Soviet Union. The Tripartite Pact was designed to prevent any other countries from deciding to join the Allies. Specifically, Britain's old ally, the pesky United States of America.
Okay, here we
When war
are.
first broke out, American public opinion was strongly against joining in. In 1940, there was an election. The Republican candidate said, "I will not send any young Americans to die in Europe." And sitting President Franklin D. Roosevelt said, "I will also not send any young Americans to die in Europe. Unless I have to, then I might." And Roosevelt won. Churchill asked him to join the war, but Roosevelt said, "No can do, Winston. But you know what? Here, have some weapons."
Okay, so this is where the weapons comes in. And that's where the US isn't really exactly neutral anymore. I've read plenty of stuff about people and countries in similar positions to this, and when I look at this, I'm like, okay, yeah, you're neutral, but like not really. Once you've started providing weapons, I understand guaranteeing free trade in times of peace or whatever, even in times of war when nations are not involved. But when they decide to send weapons there, they've at least partially chosen a side. So if action's taken against the US here, I can't completely blame them. I feel like we wouldn't let that slide.
America began supplying the Allies with food and munitions, but there was one problem. German U-boats were sinking thousands of Allied supply ships in the Atlantic, including American ones. If the Germans could sever Britain's supply line, the UK would starve. Throughout the war, the Allies had to come up with better technology to fight the U-boats. Improved radar, aircraft with longer range, better weaponry and convoy tactics. At one point, a man even called a meeting and said, "Pykrete, you take some wood, you take some ice, you put them together, you get pykrete." And then he pulled out a gun and shot some wood and it shattered. And then he shot some pykrete and the bullet ricocheted off it and hit someone else in the conference room.
Is that real?
Then they tried to make a Pykrete aircraft carrier, but that idea was scrapped because that's a really dumb idea. In the end, Alan Turing and his team of codebreakers cracked Germany's Enigma code, and the U-boats gradually became less and less of a threat. Back in Africa, Britain decided to push Italy out of Egypt. Hey, that was pretty easy, so they kept going. Hitler realized he was going to have to finally step in and do something. He went to Bulgaria and Yugoslavia and said, "Hey, I'm going to move troops through you to get to Greece, so either join us or, be invaded." Bulgaria opted to join.
One of those
Yugoslavia opted
situations,
to be
got
invaded. Then Greece finally fell to the joint German-Italian invasion. The British had moved troops from North Africa.
Germany really is impressive here. They were something else. I've never really thought about it like this, but they were definitely one of the most powerful nations on the planet for what feels like the briefest time. It was weird. Like it's weird how quick that kind of came and went. But it's really impressive. I don't have to like Hitler or any of this stuff to really acknowledge how incredibly impressive Germany was. And I've read plenty of stuff about the Soviet Union recently, and a lot of what inspired Russia to industrialize and really pick up their pace was looking at Germany. It's like, wow, look at Germany over there. They're so cool, doing awesome stuff and becoming so powerful, like really, really fast. Why can't we be cool like them? Like, that sort of thing. Of course, they had different methods, but it's kind of fun to see.
Forget to fight in Greece, which helped Rommel and his tank divisions push the British back to Egypt, and they could have kept going, but a small, mostly Australian force held out under siege for 8 months in Tobruk, denying the Germans a strategic port city and disrupting their supply line. Despite having some success in the Middle East, the British didn't seem like any real threat for now. Hey, Soviet Union, look out. With 3 million troops, Hitler launched the largest ground invasion in history, and Stalin was far from ready. Both Churchill and Roosevelt had warned him of an impending attack, but he dug his head in the sand, and the Soviets didn't stand a chance. Germany made staggering progress, with huge encircling movements capturing mind-boggling numbers of Russian troops.
I've learned a little bit about Stalin, and I have elements of his personality that I find difficult to put my finger on. Like, he's a little bit confusing. He seemed to really enjoy gathering information, but he didn't always seem ready to receive that information. Does that make any sense? It probably doesn't, because it doesn't make any sense. But the guy loved gathering information, seemingly like focus grouping a lot, but when he got dissenting information, he's like, well, I don't like that, even though that's basically what I was asking for. So I'm not surprised that he's only hearing what he wants to in this case.
250,000 at Bialystok, Minsk, 300,000 at Smolensk, nearly 700,000 at Kiev, and again at Vyazma and Bryansk.
They must be getting spread thin at this point.
An insufferable 4 years. The invasion of Russia had been Hitler's main ideological goal from the beginning, and his hatred for the ethnic peoples there was now unleashed in all its fury.
I believe I heard something about Estonia. When the Germans came in, Estonia was actually totally cool with that, because they weren't really happy with life under the Soviet Union. They were not fans of that. So the Nazis were kind of like an ally of convenience. Like, you are the better ally amongst worse allies from their perspective. Like, the Russians were the worst thing at the time. At least that's what I remember. I don't remember where I read. I think that somebody told me about that in one of my classes that I was taking. I believe they might have been from Estonia or had family in Estonia or something like that.
The Eastern Front of the Second World War was brutal for all that endured it. The Germans were now inside of Moscow, and that's it. It's all over. But then it happened. It got cold. Stupid cold. Hitler had hoped the Soviets would give up before winter, but they kept fighting. His commanders came to him and said, "Can we please dig into the winter?"
This is his Napoleon moment, right?
No, keep going. But oil is literally freezing inside our vehicles. That's fine. Keep going. We're having to leave the corpses of our frozen horses by the side of the road so we can still find our way in the snowdrift. Perfectly normal. Keep going. Hitler hadn't given his millions of men winter clothing and supplies because he thought he really should have won by now. Then Stalin called in troops from the Siberian front, specially trained to fight the extreme cold, and the Germans were no match. They were now being pushed back. They had no choice but to dig in and wait for winter to end. Germany's victories were staggering, and Japan was eager not to miss the victory bus. Their war in China had come to a standstill, but they wanted to keep expanding their sphere of influence and getting those sweet, sweet raw materials. They began making plans to expand southward, but there was a problem. Southeast Asia was heavily colonized by America and Great Britain. It was also full of ocean. Ocean meant naval combat, and there was no way the Japanese Navy could stand up to the US and the UK.
Oh, this is where we get into Pearl Harbor here, because they're afraid of the US Navy, and they wanted to, like, deal a blow to the U.S. Navy at Pearl Harbor. Okay, so that's where we are now. I was actually starting to get lost on the timeline as to how much time has passed at this point, but this is really what's going to inspire the U.S. to get very directly involved here. Pearl Harbor is an interesting piece of our history. Older people seem to... It's like... I'm a person who grew up most of the time, like, post 9/11. I was like a little kid before 9/11. I didn't understand anything. I was eating crayons or whatever. And then 9/11 happens, and then I start growing a brain, and I'm growing up in a post 9/11 world. So the go-to thing is 9/11. But for people on the older side, Pearl Harbor almost certainly holds a lot more significance. I'd imagine that probably is like the 9/11 before 9/11, because it's got kind of similar imagery that comes to mind, a similar chaos. That's something that I always found different. Interesting how different generations find different significance in events. Like, we're not even 100 years removed from Pearl Harbor, so it's still pretty recent. There's still plenty of people around who were around during that time, or like had people in their lives who were around during that time and were like directly affected by that sort of stuff. So, but it makes me wonder what's going to happen when we get into like the 2040s, the 2050s. Like, is Pearl Harbor going to become one of those things that it's just another attack? I'm curious.
So they thought, wouldn't it be nice if we could destroy their navies before we begin our conquest? And so it was. On December 7th, 1941, the Japanese launched a surprise air raid on the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor and inflicted a huge amount of damage. They also attacked British colonies in Southeast Asia. Roosevelt had no choice but to declare war.
I want to see that little... Okay. 21 ships sunk or damaged. 100 of aircraft damage. Oh, okay. Just...
Damage. They also
that was going to bother me if I didn't go back and read it.
Roosevelt had no choice but to declare war on Japan, and so did Churchill. Hitler then declared war on America, even though he totally didn't have to. The attack on Pearl Harbor seemed like a big Japanese victory, but they didn't attack any of the naval repair yards, fuel storage tanks, or the submarine base, meaning the Pacific Fleet would be up and running again pretty soon. In the meantime, though, the Japanese were able to begin their conquest. They took Guam, the Gilbert Islands, Wake Island, Hong Kong, and the Philippines. They forced Thailand to join them so they could march their troops through to Malaya. They swept through Singapore, North Borneo, the East Indies, New Guinea, the Solomons, and they were now threatening northern Australia and the borders of India. Japan's victory had been as staggering as the Germans, and it reinforced the Japanese.
They've conquered most of that area over there. That's actually really impressive how quickly they could do that sort of a thing. It kind of blows my mind as somebody who's not very militarily minded to see how far the Germans can push themselves, how far the Japanese can push themselves without being spread too thin, without that being a major concern. Like, we cannot go any further. But that's always kind of what's on my mind as I see them expanding much quicker. And it must be especially difficult with a lot of these island nations. It probably takes a lot of resources to deal with all that. Walking across land with troops is one thing. Needing boats and planes and all that stuff, that's definitely different.
Japanese idea that this was a divine war which they were destined to win, but their victories had been based on speed, not power, and power would eventually catch up with them. For now, though, in all occupied nations, the people suffered. Persecution, forced labor, harsh punishments for any who spoke out against their occupiers. In Europe, the Nazis were rounding up ethnic minorities and other unwanted groups and individuals.
Hold on. I'm having internet problems, clearly. We're taking this down to 720p. Want to make sure this doesn't buffer to death. I'm gonna close these curtains as well. There we go. That's a little better. Sorry about that. I didn't even look at the camera thing to see that. I was getting a glare here.
In particular,
that time of day.
Millions of Jewish people would suffer through the terrible events of the Holocaust. Brave resistance movements rose up in defiance of their invaders, while the people held out for hope. And hope was coming. Winter was over, and Hitler could continue his push eastward. But this time, he switched up his strategy. He wanted to focus on the south. His plan was to cut off the Russian armies in the Caucasus, an area full of oil, and then invade the Caucasus and take all the oil. His forces moved across the north with ease, and Hitler got cocky. He rerouted the 4th Panzer Army south early, leaving the 6th Army to complete the encircling movement alone.
Oh no!
And take the
I mean, yes, but no.
Stalingrad. The Russians defended it fiercely, and Stalingrad saw some of the harshest fighting of the entire war. The Soviets held up the German advance for 5 months as they battled in the war-torn city, which bought them valuable time. When the Germans had first launched their invasion a year earlier, the Soviets had moved their factories to the east. Those factories had been building a butt-ton of tanks and aircraft and getting the Soviet army up to scratch. Now, it was ready. Stalin gathered his new and improved forces around the city, and in an attack that resembled Hitler's own encirclement tactics, they began surrounding the 6th Army. Hitler's commanders came to him and said, "Hey, maybe we should retreat." But Hitler said, No, you stay.
Oh no!
The entire 6th Army was trapped and had to surrender. With complete air superiority,
I think I see where this punchline is going.
the Soviets started pushing westward. For Stalin, it was a resounding victory. For Hitler, an absolute catastrophe. Things also weren't looking too good for Hitler elsewhere. With America now in the war, Allied bombing over German cities reached devastating levels. In Africa, the British had pushed Rommel back again. Then they were pushed back again. And finally, after a decisive battle at El Alamein, and with American and British troops arriving in the west, the Germans and Italians were squeezed out of Africa. Japan was also already seeing its rapid success being turned around. They attempted...
Dude, with how quick this stuff happens, it's really... I know the video is oversimplified, but like the newer ones, they are so long you could hardly call them that anymore. But like with how quick all that happened, I'm just like thinking, what about that? I want to know more about that. But there's always places I'm sure I could learn more about those particular events in particular. I was very curious about the taking back of Africa, but it's just like, okay, it's back. Gotcha.
Attempted to take the island of Midway, but the U.S. Navy was ready for the attack, and they sank Japan's carrier. Actually, they sank a lot of them.
Oh,
It was
no.
a battle from which the Japanese Navy would never recover. British, Indian, and Chinese troops held the line in the harsh jungle terrain of Burma, and the Japanese suffered losses in the Solomon Islands and New Guinea. They began to realize they were not invincible. With the Axis out of Africa, the Allies had to decide their next move. Churchill still wanted to attack from the south, while the Americans preferred a full sea invasion in northern France. All right, said the Americans, we'll do it your way. Allied forces successfully landed in Sicily and began moving north. They also carried out bombing raids over Rome. The thing was, many of the people in Sicily had relatives living in America, and they greeted the American troops quite warmly. With the war reaching home territory, most Italians just weren't that into it, and Mussolini was suddenly very unpopular. He was voted out by his own fascist Grand Council and was toppled from power. Italy immediately began negotiations for surrender. Hitler wasn't surprised and had already sent reinforcements southward. In an operation he ironically called Operation Axis, German troops quickly disarmed Italian troops in the north. The Allies continued fighting the Germans up through Italy, but then winter set in, meaning mud, and everything.
So I'm very curious about what happens when war kind of hits home. Because as an American, a lot of us today have not had that happen to us. It's been a while since we've had a conflict on this scale. But there have been wars, and plenty of people have had war kind of like hit them at home. And that's so foreign to Americans. Like, we have events like 9/11. We have Pearl Harbor. That's kind of home, but it's also like not on the mainland, so it's got that degree of separation for a lot of people who are not from like Hawaii or something. But it makes me wonder how quickly the American people would be willing to change their minds if attacks started happening on the American mainland, or if something in the American identity would cause us to more double down. These days, I have no idea. I'm actually really learning a lot about American identity right now because we're dealing with a lot of things that we've not had to deal with before. These are unprecedented times, so it really makes me wonder what that would feel like. Seeing like Mussolini get turned on, it just provokes thought.
Slowed to a halt. All right, said the Americans, let's do it our way as well. Germany had made itself a lot of enemies, and millions of Allied troops had been gathering in England as factories worked around the clock producing the war material needed for a super crazy massive, the likes of which the world has never seen before, invasion of Europe. The Germans knew an Allied invasion would come, but they didn't know where it would land. Thanks to Allied deception tactics, they thought there was a pretty good chance it would come at Calais, but the Allies were really going to land in Normandy because it was less fortified and the beaches were nicer. Under the careful planning of General Eisenhower, the invasion that had been long in the making was just about ready to go.
Dwight Eisenhower, another one of those presidents that comes out of the military. It's so interesting whenever we see that. It's a tradition that goes back to Washington. We have Washington, Jackson, Harrison, Taylor, Grant, and Eisenhower's among them. And it's kind of cool whenever you see that sort of thing. They don't always have the best track record. Just because you are in the military does not necessarily mean you are going to be a great president, but I think it makes for fun historical drama to learn about. To follow somebody in a war and then follow somebody in office. They've pretty much got everything you could possibly want if you're a political historian.
Just one thing was preventing the launch: the British weather. For a short while, everyone sat around
garbage weather.
Day, and then it came. On the night of June 5th, over 1,000 bombers took off and raided coastline defenses, while paratroopers were dropped inland in a bit of a chaotic operation, tasked with sabotaging defenses and capturing key bridges to stop any German reinforcements from reaching the beaches. Early the next morning, the barrage came, as Allied ships fired a huge number of shells at the German fortifications, and then the landings. The Americans at Utah and Omaha, the British at Golden Sword, and the Canadians at Juneau. It was a tremendous struggle.
Oh, that's Canada.
Canada. Omaha, but the Allied troops
God, I was confused about the flag.
The landings were a success. Then they began their movements inland. They took the port of Cherbourg and the city of Caen. The Americans moved south to capture Brittany. Then, in a massive disaster for the Germans, British and Canadian troops from the north and Americans from the south trapped the German 7th Army in a near wipeout encircling movement. In August, Allied troops landed in the south of France to little resistance.
Oh, no.
On one beach, all they found was a Frenchman handing out champagne.
Is
Paris
that real?
was liberated, and the Germans were pushed out of France as the Allies entered Belgium. In the Far East,
You know, France, we got you. You need us. I'm sure a lot of us would be okay with having your back. You've had our back in the past, but for real, this is actually a really cool comeback story. If I were to think of a world war as not just a terrible catastrophe where a lot of people died, which it was, but if I were to think of it like from, weirdly enough, like a writing standpoint, it's a well-written conflict. I know that's a stupid way. It kind of trivializes things, and I don't mean to do that, but I kind of understand why there's so much really good fiction written around World War II, because it really does have just the right amount of drama. It's got kind of a comeback. Everything looked bad, and then we were picking it back up. So it has great, like, dramatic mistakes. So I get it. I totally understand the appeal there.
The Allies started to push the Japanese out of Burma, as the Americans launched a two-pronged offensive in the Pacific. In the south, General MacArthur led the push to liberate the Philippines, while General Nimitz oversaw the brutal island-hopping campaign. American forces had to make hard-fought landing after hard-fought landing on fiercely defended small islands as they moved steadily towards the Japanese mainland. The Japanese believed
We're America, though. We got ships, yeah. Guns and ships.
The most dishonorable act was to surrender. As a result, they fought ferociously to the very end. And the closer the Americans got to the mainland, the more ferocious the resistance became. In February 1945, the Americans captured the island of Iwo Jima, and an intense firebombing campaign of Japan's wooden cities began. The Allies suffered some setbacks trying to liberate the Netherlands.
The sense of honor in Japan has always been something kind of fascinating to me. One of you made the interesting points in the comments of a video. I don't know if it was the last one or a different video that I did that kind of had some World War II stuff in it. I think it was talking about the atom bomb or something. But it really was about the how just completely vicious that sense of honor could drive people to be. Because this is more than just life and death. This is kind of an abstract idea, something that's really hard to take away from somebody when it's ingrained in their culture. Another comment that I read talked about the rape of Nanking and how they approach it, and how they don't really talk about it as much because of that sense of honor. I find that a little weird from my perspective, because when America does something bad, I think it should be taught and we should learn through that stuff. I don't know what they do like in the school system or whatever. I've not been exposed to that sort of thing, but it at least contextualizes the whole situation a little better. Even if we can't fully relate to it, it's good to understand where they're coming from.
But they were making progress and were now threatening the industrial heartland of Germany. Hitler's health, both mentally and physically, was rapidly deteriorating. Things were looking bad, and he was desperate. He said, "We need to turn this thing around, and I have just the trick. Remember a few years back when we blitzkrieged through the Ardennes and trapped the Allied forces in Belgium? Well, I'm going to do the exact same thing. Again." He gathered his forces and tried to pound them through the Ardennes. He used up the remainder of Germany's strength and resources, and he managed to create quite a nice bulge. He also trapped some American forces in the Belgian town of Bastogne. The Germans sent the trapped Americans a message saying, "Surrender or be annihilated." When it was read out to the commanding officer, he said, "They want to surrender? No, sir, they want us to surrender." Nuts! And that's what they sent up as their official reply. General Patton's army then managed to break the siege from the southwest, and the Germans were pushed back. Hitler's last-ditch attempt had failed, and what followed was a total collapse of the German forces. The Allies pushed into Germany from both sides. The Soviet Union took Warsaw and kept pushing to Berlin.
There was a book I had to read recently that talked about the Soviet soldiers as they started to take the land back here. And it was very interesting getting to see the perspective of the Soviet soldiers, because there's a lot of ordinary people during this time in the Soviet Union that just generally don't have their voices heard. They don't have their stories written down, so there's very rare examples of a lot of that stuff. But them coming in to see Germany, they'll witness the concentration camps, which is going to inspire a lot of hatred there, but they'll also see the prosperity of Germany, how like what they have that the Soviet Union does not have, and that's going to generate some mixed feelings, because obviously they'll look at this stuff and be like, oh, why don't we have that stuff? But then there's this other element of like, why do these people who are doing all these awful things have this stuff? Like, is it like off the backs of all the people they've hurt? And there's also going to be resentment there. So it's got to be like a crazy culture shock there. The Soviet Union is unique in how isolated it was at the time. So that must have been amazing.
In his bunker, Hitler realized all hope was lost. Berlin
Yeah,
fell,
there we go.
and with it, Hitler's dreams of a great German empire. 2 of the Axis nations had been knocked out, 1 to go. The Americans began their assault on Okinawa, the last island before they would reach the Japanese mainland. The desperate Japanese fought hard, launching kamikaze attacks on the U.S. ships. The citizens of Okinawa suffered through the terrible fighting, but in 2 months, the island was captured. The Allies now had to make a choice. Either continue the devastating struggle up the Japanese mainland, or they could try to coerce the Japanese into surrendering now. In July, the first successful atomic bomb test took place in New Mexico, and the destructive weapon was ready for use. America and the UK were also seeing the Soviet Union not so much liberating as occupying its captured territory.
So we have an opportunity to talk about the atomic bomb now, which it's an interesting topic, and I have very mixed feelings on it. Obviously, if we had not dropped the atomic bomb at this time, I feel like it would have been dropped at some point, and the fact that it was dropped at this point makes us fear it now. Like, nobody wants to get into a conflict with a nuclear power. So that's probably stopped us from getting into a lot of conflict and stopped other countries from getting into another conflict of this sort. However, to say that it was worth it it feels kind of dismissive of all the people who were hurt in the process. In a sense, like, I kind of understand why we dropped the first one. I don't have to necessarily like it, but I guess I can understand it. I'm very iffy about the need to drop the second one. That one, I don't really understand the justification for that one. It feels like we could have waited that one out a little bit better. Maybe this definitely does give us more leverage when the surrender finally comes. That's one of the big things. If you really want to blow them away, it does give you a lot of leverage when it comes to negotiations. But I don't know. It's hard to say that any of it's okay. I think it's okay to understand it, but like you don't have to like it.
And so they wanted to put on a show of force. On August 6th, the A-bomb fell.
Oh yeah, it's Truman now, not
then, on the 9th,
Roosevelt.
Nagasaki. The cities were reduced to rubble, and for the people living there, it was a terrible fate. But for the Allies, it achieved their main aim. In September, the Emperor announced Japan's surrender, saying the war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. After
that's
6
what he
years,
said?
War was finally over. The Allies occupied Japan for 8 years. The Emperor was allowed to keep his position, but General MacArthur made sure this picture was printed in the Japanese press.
Oh, I love this, because it's like, he's so short. He's so short. It's people care about stupid things, but like when you are treated as a god on Earth, just showing that you're short can mean a lot.
To display to the Japanese people that their emperor was not the divine, powerful being they had believed. Germany was divided between America, the UK, France, and the Soviet Union. In 1949, the Allied sectors were united into West Germany. The Second World War had been more terrible and destructive than the first. In its aftermath, 2 major superpowers with 2 very different ideologies had come out victorious, and the tension between the 2 of them would create a new kind of war. A very, very cold one.
Okay.
Wow, Churchill, that looks just like me.
So he's about to do an ad, I'm sure of that. So I'm going to watch through the ad and kind of think for a minute, and I'll give you my final thoughts when it's over.
And your app is doing really well. And this quesadilla you made is to die for. How'd you learn to do all this stuff? I used the link in the description to get 2 months of Skillshare for just 99 cents. Wow, tell me more. Okay. Skillshare is an online learning community with more than 19,000 classes in design, business, technology, and more. Premium membership gives you unlimited access to high-quality classes taught by genuine experts working in their field, so you can improve your skills, unlock new opportunities, and do the work you love. If you want to learn how to create games, you can check out the courses on using Unity or creating vector art. There are courses for software development, music production, arts and crafts, or if you want to learn how to animate like I do, you can find loads of courses for beginning animation. And Skillshare won't take a heavy toll on your wallet compared to other learning platforms, with an annual
that's
subscription
great.
being under $10 a month. If you'd like to give it a try first, then I've got a deal just for Oversimplified viewers. The first 1,000 people to use this link, which can also be found in the description, will get their first 2 months of Skillshare for just 99 cents. That's right, just 1 cent short.
That's a great deal.
So be sure to sign up
Definitely
using the
expired
link
now,
in the
but great
description.
deal.
Improve your skills and learn something new today.
Alrighty, so thoughts. I don't know if this is gonna make me like go out and really study World War II. It was very good. I walk into this thinking like, yeah, I'm not really a huge fan of World War II. Then I walk out of it being able to appreciate certain elements and having like certain narrow pieces of it looking a little bit more appealing, and there might be some elements that I do want to explore a little bit further, but the war on the whole, I don't think I'm going to become a World War II historian tomorrow. That probably isn't the case. I'm very comfortable in my area of study, but there's a lot of elements to this time that I think are very much worth study that I may explore at some point in time. A lot of that part one stuff, I think there's a lot of elements that a sociologist could definitely have a field day with, not just a historian. Like sociology probably does have a field day with a lot of the early World War II and even World War I events. So I don't know. I'm out of words. This has been kind of a long one. Sometimes when these get a little bit long, I kind of run out of things to say just because my brain isn't generating words anymore. But yeah, that was really cool. I want you guys to let me know which oversimplified videos you might want me to do next. There's a lot of, like the mini war series. I've seen that he has those, and I would really like to check out some of those. I just don't know where I should start, if I should just do them in order. Let me know what your preference is. That was a fun one, and I like this video. If you like this video, subscribe for more and that stuff, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Leave suggestions in the comment section below and become a channel member. Yeah! Alright, I'll see you guys next time. Bye.